Merry Christmas, Movement Mortgage. This is a weird one. We are celebrating all over our nation right now in homes and basements and apartment buildings, trying to come together and lift up the light and the hope of Christmas. Normally I'd be walking around high-fiving LG3, shouting, and a few of our team members in the front row, and I'm not gonna lie, this is weird. It's weird. I'm standing in an empty auditorium staring at a camera because this has just been that kind of year, the kind of year that throws us the curveballs that we didn't see coming. So when Adam came to me and said, hey, this year, we're gonna celebrate Christmas with a theme of unseen, man, I knew he had nailed it. I knew he had nailed it because really, us stepping onto the scene during a time of adversity, during a time of pain, during a time of suffering, that's what this organization is all about. The last time our nation faced the kind of adversity, faced the kind of darkness, despair, strife, the very year Movement was born. The year we said we knew that in our darkest times in our nation, what we needed were points of light, because light always overcomes darkness. And so we're going to celebrate that we have a purpose that we have stepped into this year. That amidst hurt, that amidst suffering, Lord, that we have been called to be light. And you have done that in so many incredible ways. But I'd be remiss not to acknowledge so much of the unseen hurt and pain that we've experienced as a community. We've lost team members this year. I got a text on the way over here saying, Casey, please, just bring us a message of hope. I'm going to be spending Christmas watching this celebration with my mom and dad. Both of them have COVID, and they're scared. Can you give us a message of hope? Team, Movement exists to bring hope. And the reason we exist to bring hope is because of the good news of the message of Christmas itself, that we have a God who looked down and he saw every hurt, he saw every fear, he saw the loneliness, he saw the anxiety, he saw the depression, he saw people in pain, and he didn't just see us. He saw us, and then he came. He emptied himself and sent his own son, Jesus, to be with us, to walk with us, to be our comfort in times of trouble, to be our joy in times of despair, to epitomize what love is for a hurting world. He didn't just sit in heaven saying, I'm going to sit here, look down at this hurt and let my people weep. He said, I am going to bring them good news. My son, Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us. Now that's a lot to unpack. That's a lot to understand. I felt like I gave you the Christmas present right up front. But maybe we're going to do like one of those movies, Forrest Gump. You guys remember Forrest Gump? Where the movie starts with the ending, he's sitting on a bench looking at the box of chocolates, and you back up a little bit and understand how you get there, because I think it's a lot to try to understand how it is a God that sees us comes down and expresses his love for us with a celebration of Christmas. That's a lot to understand, a lot to unpack. And I'm thankful that in my life, I've had some men and women who have helped me do that. They haven't done it so much with words and theology. What they've done is actually modeled lives that have shown me what it looks like to pour yourselves out for those in need and love your neighbor as yourself. I grew up in D.C. during the 80s and 90s. It was a wild and fun time. It was the height of the crack epidemic, actually. And D.C. was a pretty scary place. It was a pretty dark place filled with a lot of sadness, a lot of fear. And my father had a hardware store right in the middle of D.C. And he used to come home every night and regale us with tales and stories of the men and women that worked in the store and the exciting adventures they had, the things that they saw. And so many of the stories of those men and women informed my life and kind of shaped my perspective as a young man of what it looks like to love your neighbor as yourself. But there are two men in particular in that story that most profoundly impacted me. One, his name was Earl E. Byrd. Now, my man Earl is, this is one of the strongest men I've ever known. And I don't just mean physically. He is physically ripped, but he is also just spiritually and emotionally strong. My father still describes him as the only man he has ever known that has no fear in his life whatsoever. And after a couple of weeks of working together, Earl came to my father one morning and said, Mr. Dennis, I'm going to have to resign. And my dad looked at him and said, what in the world? It was tough to find men like Earl with the character of Earl to work at the hardware store. He said, it's nothing you've done, but I'm going to have to resign. So my dad accepted his resignation. Earl left. And about 3 hours later, another character entered my family's life, a man named Alonzo Snowden. And my father would still describe Alonzo as one of the most joyful people he's ever met in his life. And if you meet Alonzo, you'll see a smile that just lights up a room. There's no situation that brings him down. He's just a man full of joy. He walked in, he said, I understand there is a job here that might be available. And my dad said, actually, there is. I just lost an employee a few hours later, not really figuring it out. He was just thankful for having another man show up and take that job. So my father hired Lonzo. The great stories began. And a few weeks later, they began to talk. And my dad had not been able to figure out why in the world Earl had resigned. This is a great guy, and he couldn't figure out why he had resigned. And they actually need some more help in the warehouse. So my father asked Lonzo, hey, Lonzo, you know anybody that might be able to fill this job? And he goes, yeah, actually, I do. Earl, who used to work here, needs a job. My dad looked at Lonzo and goes, Earl? How'd you know Earl? He goes, Earl and I go to church together. Earl's the one that told me about this job. I said, he told you about this job? I said, yeah. We were praying together. And I let it be known in our prayer group that I needed a job. And I was afraid of what was going to come if I didn't find a job and I had no prospects. So then Earl looked at me at the prayer group and said, Lonzo, show up at F.L. Watkins tomorrow at 12 o'clock. Dennis Crawford has a job for you. Now, it was in that moment that my dad put it together that Earl had given Lonzo his job. Earl didn't have a bunch of money in the bank. Earl didn't have a whole lot to fall back on. What he had was a heart and a courage that said, I see my brother in need, and I'm going to give him what I have. I'm going to love my neighbor as myself, the way my God loved me, seeing me in my poverty, seeing me in my desperation, and giving me what was most precious, his son. Now, Earl didn't do this for show. Earl didn't do this for accolades. In fact, he did it in a very unseen way, I think never thinking it would come to the light of day. But what he didn't know is that that lesson would profoundly impact my father and his faith. And my father would pour those same lessons into me, telling me what it meant to be a man, what it meant to love your neighbor as yourself, and giving me a picture of a man who did that in a way that I don't even think today I'm courageous enough to follow. But when we started this company, Earl's example of loving your neighbor as yourself is what inspired me to say we are going to be a people and an organization that takes what we have and gives it to those most in need. And so I don't know if you saw it. It was on the video clip earlier. It went by pretty fast. But Movement, this year, because of the incredible work that you did, because in the face of adversity, you were fast to the fight, you adapted, you overcame. This year, we are going to have the incredible privilege of pouring $200 million back into our foundations to pour out into hurting communities across America and around the world. And while we're going to get to build schools, we're going to get to build health clinics, that money's going to go to build affordable homes, that money's going to go to build hope centers all over Central America. Those structures themselves, they're simply monuments. They're monuments of love. Monuments pointing all of us to an unseen God who says, you're not forgotten, I'll never leave you, I'll never forsake you. Now, when you've been given the gift that Earl gave me, I think it's only good and right. It's only good and right that you say thank you. And so right now, I'm going to invite our entire Movement team in to a quick celebration where we get to see me saying thank you. Thank you to Earl and Lonzo for modeling what loving your neighbor as yourself really is.
I've shared this story a number of times of, I think, a prayer meeting that happened in this church one night. Lonzo, when you shared you needed a job. And Earl, I think the next day came in and resigned. I'd love to hear some of that story,
okay.
maybe just from different people's perspectives and just kind of what had gone on that night, because that was, that's a big one in my mind.
I was on unemployment, and I was just searching for a job, and I talked to Brother Crawford here, Dennis, and he, I didn't even know anything about him, knowing about God, anything, So he said, "Well, I'll talk to you next week," and I just thought he was just playing around, just how people just talk and just say things.
Sure, yeah.
So all of a sudden, he did call. Then we came to church that Saturday, and God just spoke to my spirit and said, "Give him that job." So I said, "Go down to the hardware store. A man named Dennis Crawford, he's gonna hire you, but he wanted me to come in, but I'm gonna give you this job."
And I thought you had already been working for me for a few weeks.
Yeah.
You had actually been off unemployment, working at the store,
Yeah.
and just gave that job up to Lonnie.
Yeah.
And I remember you told me you were reluctant to talk to me because you thought I was a big, mean white man. I remember that night.
Why you put that in there? But so anyway, Prophet Lonzo, he went in and got the job. And I said, "You working?" He said, "Yeah." I was wondering what I was gonna do. I said, "I gave Lonnie my job, my plumber, and I done lost his job. What I'm gonna do?" I got back to the church, and I talked to Lonnie, that Saturday. And so I said, "How's the job working?" He said, "That's okay." I said, "Man, my job done ran out, my unemployment ran out." He said, "Well, Dennis, Brother Crawford, he wanna hire, he still wanna hire you." I said, "For real?" I said, "Tell him I'll be there."
When Lonnie and Earl came, it was the crew I've prayed for my whole life in hardware stores.
For
I
real?
finally had, I'm working with other believers who ask for 5 minutes off so they can go pray with the customer and want to have, revivals out in the parking lot and stuff. Unfortunately, the business didn't work out. Things kind of went south after that. But
The business might not have worked out, but I think God's purposes in
yeah, absolutely.
relationships, they weren't thwarted. That experience of sharing a need with a brother, him turn to you and say, "Hey, I have a job, you take it." What was that like?
It was just, in a blessing, and I seen God at hand, because he gets all the glory, and I seen God at work, and, in my life, because, I didn't know what I was going to do, and, I thank God for the love, because love is a two-way street, and, and when you share love will come back to you.
What you guys had, I think, is something that's really special, a movement, and that's, fellowship in the workplace, right? With men that you're doing life with 40, 50, 60 hours a week. You're working together, spend time together, but you're also growing in your faith together. You had other places maybe you could have found a job, but you saw my dad, you said, "Hey, that's not only is that a job, but that's a man that I can pour into spiritually." And I just thought that was really beautiful. And I've been the recipient of, I think, a lot of that blessing in the way you loved and poured into my dad spiritually. He had a job to give. I think you had some spiritual wisdom and maturity to give. And that mutual exchange of gifts is one that I'm just so thankful for. I think to your point, Lonzo, the beauty of a gift given is that you realize the power and the beauty of it when it's given. Now, when you have love yourself, it's powerful. It transforms your life. Man, when you have the gift to give it, I think that's what I watched playing out between you all. And that's really my hope in our company. We want to see that same kind of fellowship playing out where men and women are loving each other, sharing spiritual gifts with each other, and really living in fellowship with each other. It's really a macro picture of what I saw you guys doing just organically.
And when I came into the church, I didn't know God, I didn't know nothing. But I was taught how to love through my overseers, my pastors, my mom. I was taught how to love. And God had to instill love in me. And that's where we talk about love. We was taught that.
Dad, could you speak though? I love just the way these two men blessed you and the way they just modeled Christ, for you in your life. Some reflections you have on that.
I used to look forward to coming every day to spend time with you guys because the things I learned, I'd say on payday, I'd give them a check and they'd cash it right away into small denomination bills and they'd lay out their tithe and the pastor's fund and the van, and then they'd do their own money. That was an example to me. I mean, I tithed and, was a believing stuff too, but I saw that. These guys weren't wealthy, they didn't have money to throw around. They needed every nickel they made.
Can we talk about money for a minute? Because I think that's an important one. I see an important one in the church state. It's an important one in the business world. It's really an important one in our world. The wealth divide in America is causing more consternation, more strife over money than just about anything.
Money has its place, it has its own value, and we have to deal with certain problems. We got to pay our bills and so forth. But I learned through my suffering, that money is not more important than God, because, you can be suffering and have a lot of money and you're still not happy.
Those stories of how you all handled money, again, were some of the ones that my dad would pass down to me. And it's ones I'm still trying to pass down to my children, of just honoring the Lord, understand that, man, we are caretakers and stewards of what he has entrusted to us. Your faithfulness with the way you tithe, the way you gave generously to each other and to people in the community, kids in the neighborhood and stuff, the stories I'd hear about, it's still an example that I don't know that I'll ever live up to. I didn't realize the gift I was receiving and what you all were modeling from my dad and my mom and then me. Because I think I watched them very much try to follow in your footsteps. And you all did that so faithfully, so regularly. And those stories would come from my dad. I could tell how much he admired the two of you and the way you handled those things. So it was an incredible blessing to our family.
Like you said, I could have went to another job, but God allowed me to go there for a spiritual uplift to Brother Crawford, which he gave to you and brought home.
Obviously, the Lord moves so far beyond our sight, and moves generationally. And our message for Christmas this year was that the unseen gift of Christmas, that, God saw us in our spiritual poverty and sent his son Jesus. And yet, 2,000 years later, followers of Christ, because he did, the Lord kind of works over time. And the disciples didn't get to see that, right? I mean, they didn't get to see the breadth and the length and the impact of the ministry of their faithful following of Jesus, even in their lifetime. And they didn't get to see what it looks like today, 2,000 years later. And what we're really thinking about today was that those days when you looked and took a job and said, this is not only a good job, it's a job where I can have fellowship, and it's a job where I can pour in spiritually to a man I'm gonna work with. Those simple acts of faithfulness of following Jesus that he takes and he breaks and he multiplies. And this year I share with you all that we're gonna have the privilege of pouring $200 million back into communities across America to bring Christ-centered, redemptive infrastructure to communities that have been largely neglected. And I think we're getting to do that because of the example that you all set for me in my life of what it looks like to love your neighbor as yourself. And that's really what this day and time was about for me, was to lock arms with you all and say thank you. Thank you for the way you love me. Thank you for your faithfulness and the way you followed Jesus so many years ago, continue to up until and through this day, and then just to get to celebrate with you for what he's done. I get to sign this check to give it over, but I think the body of Christ is all a part of this. This is just an expression of what it looks like to be the body of Christ and to love one another and to give and receive gifts mutually.
It was incredibly powerful for me to get to sit with my mother and father, say thank you to Lonzo and Earl for the gift that they gave our family. And that's the beauty of giving gifts, and that's what we want for our community. First, I want you to receive the gift of Christmas. The gift of Christmas is Jesus. It is his peace, it is his love, it is his joy, it is his comfort. It is the person of Jesus. You need to receive it this Christmas. Once you've received that gift, though, don't keep it to yourself. Don't keep it to yourself. Because what Earl knew was the power and the beauty of that gift. It's only fully realized once it's given away. Once it's given away. The $200 million that we received this year into the foundation will only become exponentially more powerful, exponentially more transformational once we give it. Once we give it. This Christmas season, Movement Mortgage, we are a community of action. We are a people of purpose. We know that love is a verb. Let's move, let's act, let's find our neighbors in need and give ourselves away. And the beauty of that is this. You will never see the end of the impact. You'll never see the end of the impact of love. This year, I had the privilege of sitting a few rows up in some stands as Elevation recorded live the song that they're about to perform, The Blessing. This is a song that celebrates a God who loves us. God actually speaks to Moses in this song, and the blessing that he gives to Moses is this: the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. Movement, we want you to receive the peace of God this Christmas season. But the beauty, the miracle, the power of having received that gift is when you turn and pour it back out into a hurting world. Because like Earl would never have imagined that his sacrificial act of love would one day inform a young boy who was profoundly moved by it to pour $200 million back out into communities that he grew up in. We'll never see the end of the impact of us receiving that good gift of peace that we have in Christ, pouring it back out into a hurting world, and looking forward to the generations and generations and generations yet to come that will be transformed by that good news of Christmas. Merry Christmas, Movement Mortgage. Truly, the best is yet to come.